All right, so thank you guys again for coming to Norristown Area High School's Financial Aid Night. And so we have a special guest here with us, Mr. Michael Burke from FEA. And FEA, as you see here, is the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. And they are the people who give you guys presentations so that you can learn about how federal aid and how state aid works. And so he'll give you all of the information that you need to know. And also, what we will also do at the end is we have scheduled something called FAFSA Completion Night. And right now it's scheduled for October the 26th. Most likely that date will be changing, but for right now, if you can just bookmark October the 26th on your calendars, and I will automatically add you all to the—
Oh, my camera on.
Oh yeah, the camera's on. Yeah, you can stay on. Just make sure you mute yourself, babes. And so you want to make sure that you are there for that, because we have someone coming from Montco that will actually help you guys do those applications. All right. So we're also, before we get started again, we're going to have Miss Maria Salazar just make another announcement in Spanish for any Spanish speaking families that would like to go to our Spanish speaking presentation.
Muy buenas noches y bienvenidos a esta reunión para hablar acerca de la ayuda financiera. Si hay alguien aquí en esta reunión que necesita esta presentación totalmente en español, pusimos el enlace en el chat. Pueden hacer clic en ese enlace y pueden participar en la reunión que es igual a esta, pero solamente en español sin intérprete. Gracias.
All right, so with that being said, Mr. Burke, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Okay.
First, I'm going to advance my slides so you have my contact information. As Nicole mentioned, I work with the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. We're commonly known as FEA. We've been around for a long time, and we manage the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, and there are a few other special grant and scholarship programs that we manage also on behalf of the Commonwealth. I have a lot of information that I'm going to be sharing with you this evening. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to enter them in the chat. Hopefully I'll answer them as we go through the presentation. But if you have questions of a personal nature or special circumstances that may be happening in your family, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. This is my email and my phone number. We can talk about how to manage those circumstances that are happening in your family. Or if there's anything else that I can do for you, please make sure you use me as a resource. So moving forward, as I said, I have a lot of information I'm going to share with you. We're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about the application process and then what happens once the student has completed the application. Hopefully we'll have some time. We can look at some of the flagship federal state aid loan programs that are available, and then also some scholarship options that are out there for you. I will not be talking about basic financial aid tonight, but if you have questions about that, or if there's something that I can clarify, don't hesitate to ask me or to submit your question or follow up with me later. I do want to remind you, though, the FAFSA is out there. So for all my seniors, the 2022-23 FAFSA became available on October 1st. And some of you may have completed the form already. Some of you may have not, or are just looking at it. And just keep in mind that as we go through the presentation, if you started the application or you've already completed it and there's something that maybe you didn't add or maybe you didn't put something in correctly, don't worry about it. We can always go back in and correct it and update it so it's not a problem. And if you haven't started yet, hopefully this presentation will give you some good guidance in terms of what you're going to need to complete the application and what steps you're going to have to take in order to submit that. So moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about where the money comes from. So for the most part, besides the student and the family, there are only 4 sources of financial aid. So the federal government has grant programs, work study programs, loan programs that are available to you. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania also has the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, totally separate than the federal grant program. And there are a few other programs that are out there as well. And then the schools, whether it's a community college or a business trade or technical school or a private school or state school, any type of higher education that you're looking at, they also participate in financial aid and will consider you for any aid that they have to offer. And then the last resource are those private outside scholarships. And I hope my seniors have been researching those and looking for those. If not, you really should get started doing that, because that's money, grants and scholarship monies, that's in addition to what the government, the state, the federal, and the schools will be considering you for. You should continue to do that every year also, students, because your profile changes and there are new private outside scholarships coming on board all the time. So hopefully as we go through the program, I'll be able to share some additional tips about some of those private outside scholarships. So let's get into the meat of the presentation. Again, to be considered for financial aid, you have to apply. I get that question all the time from families, and I'm strongly going to encourage you, please apply. Don't assume that you're not eligible, regardless of maybe past experiences, or maybe you heard some stories from neighbors or other relatives that said that they didn't get any financial aid. The formulas, the aid, the programs, the funding levels, all of that gets tweaked every year. Even the information that we collect on the FAFSA each year gets changed. So please make sure you apply and let us tell you what you're eligible for. Don't assume you're not eligible for financial aid. So the very first thing is all students who are interested in financial aid must complete the free application for federal student aid, commonly known as the FAFSA. It's the key to the financial aid process. It's used to determine your eligibility for all federal aid. So the federal Pell Grant Program, the loan programs, the work study programs, and other aid that the school has to offer through the federal government. The state uses that information to determine your eligibility for state aid, and the schools are also going to use that information to determine your eligibility for need-based grants, scholarships, other need-based aid, or other types of financial aid the schools may have to offer. So that is the one application that all students need to complete. In some cases, students, it's the only application that you need to complete. Now, there are some schools that you might be looking at that may require, in addition to the FAFSA, some other forms. So it could be the CSS profile, or it could be an institutional form. Please keep in mind the CSS profile is not a free form. So FAFSA is. Don't pay anybody to complete the FAFSA. There's a lot of help out there for you. And within the application itself, there's a lot of guidance and help built into that. So the profile is managed by College Board. It has a $25 application fee. And it does include the first choice school, but each additional school that you list on the profile, you'll be charged an additional $16. Now, College Board just announced that if a family's income is $100,000 or below, they're going to waive that fee. So it'll be a free form for you if you, fit into that requirement. And as I said, some schools may have their own institutional form as well that you might have to complete to be considered for institutional aid. The CSS profile is really only required by some private institutions, not all of them. You can go out and Google CSS profile or go on College Board and you can see a list of all the schools that require that form. If a school doesn't require it, don't fill it out. It's not going to help you, okay? Now, for the state grant program here in Pennsylvania, because you are a first-time applicant, you do have to fill out the state grant form. It's a very simple, easy form. It's 6 or 7 additional questions. You can do it at the same time that you're doing the FAFSA, and I'll walk you through that process as well. And that's the easiest and quickest way to complete the state grant form. Even though you have to apply for financial aid each year, with the state grant form, you only do that once. We just roll over the information each year, so we make it even easier for you. So again, it's important, students, that you're looking at your schools, going to their website, talking to financial aid or admissions, and just seeing what forms they require at that school for you to be considered for all aid if you were to attend that school. Okay, moving forward. Deadline dates is the second thing that's really important that you know. So in addition to looking at the school and finding out what forms they need, when do they want that? Because you're going to see everybody sets their own deadline date. So the federal government has the latest of deadline dates. So for my seniors, you're completing the 2022-23 FAFSA that's out there now, and the federal government gives you until June 30th of 2023 to complete that and still be considered for federal aid. However, you can see for the state, we want that information a lot earlier. So for first-time applicants, and that would be all my seniors or any returning students, if you're looking at a 4-year degree granting institution or traditional institution, you got to file the FAFSA by May 1st to be on time for the state. Now, if you know that you're just going to a community college, a business trade or technical school, hospital school of nursing, a 2-year non-transferable program, or there are a few, I think there's 9 of them here in Pennsylvania, open admissions institutions. We give you until August 1st, the first year, to file that FAFSA and still be on time for the state. But each year after that, it would be May 1st. Now, I will tell you that the schools want that information a whole lot earlier. So make sure you're looking to see not only what forms are required, but for all the schools that you think you're interested in attending, look to see when that school's priority deadline date is, if they have one. And just make sure you're filing your FAFSA, any other form the school requires, whatever the earliest of deadline dates for the schools you're looking at. Therefore, you won't miss out on any financial aid because you filed late. So hopefully, that's clear. You don't have any questions on that. Okay, moving forward. So whose information goes on the FAFSA? Students, it's your application. You're the one that's going on the school. So every student that is interested in financial aid has to file the FAFSA. So please keep in mind, students, parents, if you have more than one child that's entering college at the same time, or you have a new student going into college, but you also have a student who's returning to college, each of those students would need to complete their own FAFSA application. Now, if you are married parents living together, your information has to be included on the FAFSA along with the student. If you are the biological parent, even though you may never married and are living together, your information must also be included. If you are in a divorced or in a separated situation, normally we only want the information of the student and the custodial parent, the parent in which the student lives with. Now, the only time that would be different is if the student said, well, I live with both my parents equally throughout the year, 50-50. And that's something that you would have to determine. And if that's the case in your family, then students, you would need to figure out which parent provided the most financial support to you in the last 12 months or the last time that you received support. And it would be that parent and your information that would be included on the application. Now, if you are divorced, however, and you did remarry, so there's a step parent, even though they may not be contributing to that student or contributing to their education, it doesn't matter. Their information must be included on the FAFSA. And if you've adopted the student, you're considered a legal parent. So FAFSA really only collects the information of the student and the parent, no one else. So if you are a foster parent, your information does not get included on the FAFSA. If the student's in a legal guardianship, so you went to court and they made you or someone else the legal guardian for that student, the legal guardian's information is not included. In those scenarios, the student is actually considered independent and we only need the student's information. And then again, if the student is living with maybe someone else, a grandparent, maybe another relative, an aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister, boyfriend, girlfriend, or even a community member, they're not the parent, and therefore their information should not be included on that FAFSA. So please keep that in mind as well. FAFSA only collects information for the student and the parent or parents. Okay, moving forward, what are you going to need to complete the form? This is important because behind the scenes of the application, there are several federal agencies that are reviewing the information that you and your parents are providing to authenticate you for security purposes, identity theft purposes. So you want to make sure you're providing, good and accurate information. So students, parents, you will need your official Social Security number. And that's the number that's associated to your official Social Security card and the name and the date of birth that is attached to that. Now, if you changed your name, so let's say you got married or you got divorced and remarried, or maybe a student changed her name. I've seen that happen quite often. and you never updated that with Social Security Administration, unfortunately, you have to use the name that is associated with that official Social Security number, the name and date of birth, until you change it. Otherwise, your application is going to error out, maybe reject it, or the school is going to ask you for additional documentation. It'll delay the process because they then need to confirm that you are who you say you are. Now, if for some reason, if a parent doesn't have a Social Security number, and that may happen, then you would just enter all zeros for the parent's Social Security number. If you are a parent who is from the freely associated states, you're just going to enter 666 in as your Social Security number. And that's all explained in the application. Now, you will need, if you file taxes in 2020, you're going to need your 2020 tax return, any W-2s from 2020, and any schedules that you filed with your 2020 tax return. FAFSA is mostly income driven, and it collects information or really looks at income information for the family more than anything else. Now, if you didn't file taxes because you weren't required to file taxes, not a problem. It's not a prerequisite for the FAFSA or to apply for financial aid. The only thing that you would need to do is any financial questions that are presented to the student or the parent, you need to answer those questions, and then you just move on. You will also need to provide some untaxed income information from 2020 if you have that. Some examples of that would be if you were receiving child support, or you had workman's compensation, or maybe some disability benefits, or you made a contribution to perhaps a retirement savings account, or a 401k, or an IRA, or annuity, or a pension fund. So if you made a contribution in 2020, you may need to include that on the application. You will need information about your current checking and savings account. You may need some information about investments and assets that you have. So again, it's a smart application. It'll tell you whether or not you need to provide assets, because in some situations, there are some families or students that may not need to provide any asset information. But if you do, then you would need to have to provide that as of the day you're completing the FAFSA. So a little bit different than income. What are examples of investments or assets that are collected on the FAFSA? Things such as like a certificate of deposit, a CD, if you have those, stock options, trust funds, money market funds, mutual funds, property, other real estate that you may have, not your home. There are some assets that never get included on the FAFSA, and we'll talk about those as we go through the presentation. But there are some things that you will need to include. Students, you need to include your email address. Please don't use your high school email address, because many times that's not available to you after you graduate. So please make sure you're using an email address that you look at, that you have access to after high school, because the federal government, the schools, and the state are all going to communicate to you via email. So you got to be looking at your emails as you're going through this process. And parents, if you have an email, it would be good if you add your email as well. Students will also need to create a federal student aid account, or FSA ID, and at least one parent would also need to create an FSA ID. And we're going to talk more about that, I think, in the next slide. So the FSA ID, what is that? Actually, the federal government has really simplified this process and allows you to apply for financial aid electronically. So you can submit the application electronically, but the federal government also requires the student and at least one parent to sign the application. And the FSA ID acts as your legal electronic signature. Now, the federal government is not going to provide this to you. You're actually going to create it. It's just a username and a password that you're going to make up. It's good forever, unless you change it or the federal government changes their process, and that's unique to you. So each student would need to create their own FSA ID, their own username and password. Please, when you're creating those, incorporate your smartphone number, your mobile phone number, your email address, both if you have them, because if you ever forget your username or password, it makes it really easy for the federal government to retrieve that information and get that back to you. Okay. I also encourage my students and parents to create that FSA ID, if you can, 3 days prior to completing the FAFSA. Now, why is that? Well, believe it or not, within the FAFSA application, you can use that FSA ID to access a lot of other information on other federal government databases where they house student information. It'll also allow you to use what we call the IRS data retrieval tool, which I'm going to talk about. And there are also some other benefits that you're going to be able to use your FSA ID for as well. So it's not just to use as your electronic signature, but there are other uses for it as well. Okay. Now you can create that FSA ID the same night you're creating a FAFSA. Unfortunately, it'll only let you use that to sign your application. It will not allow you to use that FSA ID to access any of those other benefits that are built into the application until the Social Security Administration authenticates you. And it usually takes them 1 to 3 days to do that. So that's why I said if you can do it 3 days prior to completing the FAFSA, that process will all be done and you'll be all set to go. Okay. Now, parents, you need to create an FSA ID too, because you do need to sign the student's application, or at least one parent does. Both parents can get their own FSA ID. You can create them if you like. They're unique to you. You're going to go to the same websites. You're going to get the same questions as a student, except when you're entering that information, it's all about you. Okay. Parents, if you already have an FSA ID because you're in school and you created one for yourself, or maybe perhaps you have a child that's already in school and you have an FSA ID for them, you can use that same one to sign all your children's application. Now on this slide, I did include a link to the federal government's, they created a video on YouTube and it walks you, it's 2 minutes, and it walks you through the whole process of creating that FSA ID. It's very easy and it's all information about you. Just need to take your time and put in accurate information and you'll be all set to go. So if you can do that early on, that would be great. Okay, moving forward. So the FAFSA itself is broken down into 7 sections, and you can see students and parents. The majority information we're collecting is coming from the student. We don't even ask for parent information till step 4. So students, if you have that FSA ID, I strongly encourage you to start your application and sign in using your FSA ID. Why? Because it makes it even easier for you to complete this application because it pulls information in from your FSA ID and it pre-populates it in your FAFSA. So right off the bat, you have less questions to answer. Also, when you finish your FAFSA and get ready to submit that, sign it, if you started with your FSA ID, you're just going to click on student signature. It's going to pull in your FSA ID and automatically electronically sign that for you. So again, simplifying the process for you. Now, parents, you can start the application on behalf of the student if you like. Okay, here's my tip or my caution to you. There will be a link there that will say that you are the parent and you are starting the application on behalf of the student, and you must enter student identifiable information. What do I mean by that? It's the student's name, the student's social security number, and the student's date of birth that you're entering there. This is where I see parents making mistakes because sometimes they're rushing through it, they're not thinking about it, or automatically when they see something asking you, what is your social security number? What is your date of birth? The parents are entering their social security number and their date of birth. And believe it or not, in that situation, parents, you're actually the one that's applying for financial aid, not the student. So again, if you do this on behalf of the student, just make sure you're entering student information. The FAFSA, as I said earlier, is one application, but it collects student information and parent information. So it's not 2 separate forms, okay? So like I said, usually step 4 is when we start asking for parent information. I'm also going to warn my seniors, 2022-23 FAFSA is the one that you want to complete. And I do that, and I'm going to say that throughout this presentation, because prior to October 1st of this year, I had several seniors contact me and told me that they've already filed for financial aid and they wanted to know what the next steps were. And unfortunately, I had to tell them they're not going to be considered for financial aid when they enter college because they filled out the wrong form. They filled out the 2021-22 FAFSA that is out there and live. Please don't fill that out, seniors. So 22-23, make sure that's the one you're selecting. And then the other nice feature that's available is when you get into the FAFSA, you start filling it out. If you realize that you need more time than what you thought you would need, or maybe you don't have all the documentation or information to fill out the form, you can save it. So you have to create a save key. and you'll get prompted to do that. Very simple, very easy. It has to be at least 4 digits or characters, no more than 8. Make it anything you want it. Your name, your dog's name, your date of birth, but just make it really easy. So you're only going to need that if you save your application and want to get back into it. So in that scenario, it saves your application in 45 days. And as long as you come back into that application within 45 days, it's all there. All your information is saved. It'll actually pick up right where you left off. Okay. Just make sure you're accessing that before those 45 days elapse. Otherwise, you're going to lose all that information. You have to start the process all over again, and nobody wants to do that. Okay. All right. Moving forward.
Mr. Burke?
So this, yes.
Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted
No problem.
Ms. Salazar to make one last announcement, because then she's going to move over to the Spanish session.
Great. Thanks.
Buenas noches y bienvenidos a todos a la reunión acerca de la ayuda financiera. Si hay un padre o un estudiante que necesita esta presentación completamente en español, tenemos una presentación que se está dando en español y pusimos el enlace en el chat. Pueden hacer clic en ese enlace para ir a la reunión en español. Gracias.
All right.
Okay. So moving forward. So this is the FAFSA screen. Actually, when you go into studentaid.gov, you're going to see this. Now, there are several ways in which you can complete the FAFSA. There is an online, I'm going to say a paper application. You actually have to request that from the Department of Education, or you can download a PDF of the online application. However, I'm going to really, really strongly promote the online application. This is the way students, parents, you want to do it. Okay, and a lot of reasons for that. But if you need to fill out a paper application, there is one available. So you just need to contact the U.S. Department of Education, and they will mail that out to you. Or, as I said, you can download a PDF of the online application and just complete that and mail it in. Now, some cons for doing that: it only allows the student to list up to 4 schools on the online application. You have to answer every single question on that application. You physically need to sign it and date it and mail it to the federal government. It takes the federal government about 6 to 8 weeks to process a paper application. And this is the only way the state and the schools get the students' information. Okay. So if you can, do it online. The nice thing about the online application is it's a smart application. So as you're entering information into the online application, it's looking at that. And if it may determine that there are questions that don't apply to you, the student, or the parent, or both, you're never going to see that. So again, you'll have less questions to answer. It only takes the federal government no more than 72 hours to process that online application and get that information out to the state and to the schools that you've listed on the FAFSA. Actually, students, they've been turning that around much quicker. Last couple of years, they've been doing it within 24 hours and 48 hours. So they've been really good about that. You can't make a mistake when you're filling out the online application. So students and parents, you have to answer every question that is presented to you. If you feel that the question doesn't apply to you, then just enter a 0, okay? Everything you enter into the FAFSA is whole dollars, no cents, and there are no negative numbers. So anything that is a negative number would be an automatic 0, okay? So if you missed a question, FAFSA is going to provide an edit that's going to come up. It won't let you go further, and it'll say, whoops, you missed this question, you need to answer it. So all you need to do is enter the information in that and move forward. Now, if for some reason you did answer that question, because it is a smart application and it's looking at the information you're providing, and if it doesn't think it's correct, it's going to just ask you to look at your answer and confirm that it's a good answer. If it is, that's all you need to do, and you can move on. Okay. An example of that, I'll tell you what in the past a lot of families have done. So a family may enter what their income was, and then they're going to get a question that says, well, what were the taxes that you paid? Okay. Many times families will enter in the same figure. So their income and the amount of taxes that they paid to the federal government is exactly the same. So what you're saying to them is that every penny you earned, you gave back to the federal government. And we know that's not right. Okay. So it'll pick up things like that and it'll ask you to either review that, confirm it, or correct it. And all you need to do is correct it if it's wrong and move on. Okay. There are a lot of nice other benefits to the online application besides that we can get it processed earlier and get it out to your schools. So there's the IRS data retrieval tool, which I'm going to talk about. It does allow the student to list additional more schools on the online application. And the nice thing it is once the application is processed, you can actually go into it anytime you want and make any corrections, changes, updates, add schools, take schools off if need be. So it's not one and done. So you do have access to that application at any time if you need that. Now, students, you can use your desktop, your PC, your laptop, your tablet, even your mobile phone works really great on a mobile phone. Okay, so whatever device you're comfortable with, you can actually fill out your online FAFSA using that device. So again, I encourage you, that's the way to go. All right, moving forward. So if you want practice, now for my seniors, I'd say forget it. Just start filling out the application. You don't need any practice. But if I have any juniors on the line or sophomores or freshmen that are participating in this, and you want to get a heads up of, gee, if I was going to school next year, what type of federal aid would I be eligible for? The federal government put this estimator out there. They used to have what was called the FAFSA forecaster, but they did away with it. And they replaced it just recently with this estimator. And the nice thing that this does, it gives you the ability to enter certain information. It'll calculate an estimated family contribution. And we're going to talk more about that because that's the one figure that every school uses to determine the student's need at their school. And it never changes regardless of the type of school the student is attending. And it's developed based on the information that the student and the parents providing on the FAFSA. Okay, so it will tell you what that is. It'll also tell you what your eligibility is for that federal Pell Grant program, for the federal work study program, for the federal direct student loan program. So it does give you a lot of good information in terms of, what potentially you might have been eligible for if, based on the information you provided. So again, if you want to get a heads up and look at that, that's out there and that's available to you on the website listed below, which is studentaid.gov. And right after that understanding aid, if you put /estimator, it'll take you right to the estimator. Okay. So I wanted to mention that. Also, I want to just briefly talk about some changes that have been approved by Congress. But students, parents, don't be alarmed because most of these changes won't take effect until 2024-25. But I think it's really important that you're aware of them because for my seniors who'll be first-year students in college next year, hopefully by 24-25, you're going to be a junior. And unfortunately, based on some of these changes that Congress has already approved, it could change your need and your eligibility for need-based aid. So I just want to go through a couple of them very quickly with you. So one of the things that is out there and has been implemented already that used to have an impact on your eligibility for financial aid is the selective service question and the drug conviction question. Those questions are still there, students, and you have to answer them, but they will have no impact on your eligibility for financial aid. So normally males between the age of 18 and 25 are required to be registered for selective service. That's still a requirement. But in the past, students, if you weren't registered, you were not eligible for any federal aid and sometimes state aid until you registered. Now you had a certain time which you could do that. So you don't need to worry about that anymore. You do have to answer the questions, but it doesn't matter. Same thing with the drug conviction. If you had a drug conviction, and depending on when that happened, what it was, sometimes that limited your eligibility for federal aid. Again, that doesn't apply anymore. And the unsubsidized loan program that was tied to your program of study, really that doesn't apply to you guys, but that all went away as well. Okay, so I wanted to mention that very quickly. Now, there are some other changes that are going to take place, but not till 24-25. Okay, so I'm not going to, talk a lot about these, only because we don't have enough information with regards to these changes and how they're going to be implemented in 2024-25. So I only know a little bit. So I'm just going to share some things with you. That EFC, what we call the EFC, estimated family contribution, they're changing the whole formula, what goes into that, what develops that, and they're no longer going to call it an EFC. They're going to call it a student aid account, or SAI. Okay. You're also going to have the ability, when you file your taxes each year, you're going to know immediately if you're eligible for the maximum federal Pell Grant. So that's kind of nice. So right now it's the maximum is $6,495. If you file taxes, whether you were going to college next year or not, it wouldn't matter. You would know that you were eligible for that maximum amount. Now, if you're not eligible for the maximum amount, that's where the federal government is going to use that SAI that is going to be developed based on the information you're going to provide on the FAFSA form at that time and the formula approved by Congress. And they're going to look at your family size, and they're going to look at a percentage of the federal poverty level, whatever that is at that point, to determine what portion of that federal Pell Grant potentially could you be eligible for. Right now, if you have more than one child in school, that goes into the formula and gets calculated, and helps in increasing your need. Well, that's all going to go away, unfortunately. They're not going to care or matter how many people in the household are all in college at the same time. So that really could limit or impact your eligibility for some need-based aid that you got previously. So we have to see how that works out. And then the other thing is, in divorce situation, sometimes I know some parents, may, 1 year the ex-spouse may claim the student or children, the other spouse may claim them in another year, and they always get nervous about, well, I'm the custodial parent and I'm applying for financial aid for my child, but I didn't claim my child on my tax returns. How is that going to impact eligibility? And I said, don't worry about it. Doesn't have any impact whatsoever, because the IRS has their own rules with regards to who you can claim on your tax return. Well, FAFSA, or financial aid, has its own rules with regards to how we determine the number of the household, and how many people in the household are in college. So it didn't really impact, but in the future it will, because what the IRS is going to do is they're going to look to see who claimed that child on the tax return. They're automatically going to pull their information into that student's FAFSA, and they're going to use their income information to determine students' eligibility for financial aid. And then income protection allowance, we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's being increased. I don't know what they're doing or how they're increasing it, but that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. So I just wanted you to be aware that in 24-25, there are going to be some changes that are happening to the formula, and they could be significant, and they could impact a student's eligibility for need-based aid. So stay tuned. We'll tell you more as we get more news out on that. Okay, moving forward, I have two questions that I quickly want to review with my students that you're going to be presented on the FAFSA that sometimes, adds confusion. So one of the programs is the Federal Work Study Program, and you may not be aware of what that program is. I would normally tell my students, when you get to that question, answer yes to it, okay? Unless you are working a job now and you plan on continuing working that job while you are in college, okay? Then you may not want to participate in this. But if that's not the case, just say yes to this. It's a very flexible program. What it does is it allows you, the student, to work a job on or off campus. You're going to select the type of job that you want to work. You're going to select the number of hours that you want to work each week, each term, whatever the case may be. You're going to be paid at least minimum wage. In most instances, students, it's more, because the college determines what your wage will be based on the job you're doing. And then you're going to get a paycheck, usually every 2 weeks or at least once a month. Again, whatever the school's policy is, and you can do whatever you want with that paycheck. Buy pizza on the weekend or whatever the case may be. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. It's a flexible program. You can turn it down at any time, even when you get into college. But the reason why I say yes now is because most schools that participate in this, their funding is very limited. And if you wait till then, they might have already exhausted all their funds. Okay, moving forward. So this is what I was talking about, where you can add your schools. So students, the nice thing is you can do this as early as tonight if you like, or down the road. You don't have to apply to the school or be accepted to the school. So if you know you're looking at a community college, you're looking at a state school, maybe you're looking at a private school, maybe you're also thinking about one of the state-related schools like Penn State or Temple or the University of Pittsburgh or Lincoln University, they're all state-related schools. You can just list them all in your FAFSA. Now, it does limit you. So you can only list a maximum of 10 at any one time, okay? It doesn't matter the order in which you list them because each school, when they get your information, only sees themselves. So they're all listed as number one. They don't know any other school or college that you're looking at or interested in or may even be considering. So don't worry about that, okay? Now, students, if you have more than 10 schools, and that's a lot of schools to be looking at, so hopefully you can narrow that down. But if you have more than 10 schools, my suggestion would be list your top 10 schools first on your initial FAFSA. Once that's processed, and as I said earlier, we can always go back in to a processed application and we can make updates or changes. So you can add schools, take schools off, whatever the case may be. Also, within the online application, this is another nice benefit. Every question that is presented to you, the student and the parent, you're going to see a little question mark, okay? As long as you click on that, it'll open up a page of instructions, guidance to tell you what goes in that box, where the information's coming from. Is it coming from a tax return? What line on the tax return? Or a W-2? What box in the W-2? Or some other document. So we've made it very easy for you to be able to provide the information that the FAFSA is requesting. So again, you have that option here, and it'll instruct you how to add that 11, 12, 13, or how many schools that you're looking at. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, moving forward. So this is a nice tool with the online application because, if you are eligible, not everybody's eligible for this, but you don't need to determine whether or not you're eligible or not because it's a smart application. So when you get to this section, if you're eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool, I strongly encourage you to do so because, again, it's going to simplify the process and you're going to have less questions to answer. What it's going to do, it's going to take you out to the IRS website. It's going to find your tax return, student or parent or both. It's going to pull in the information that's required from your tax return and automatically download that into the FAFSA. All those questions are answered. You don't have to answer any of them. They're done. You just move on, okay? Now, all of your information is encrypted. So you will not see any figures or numbers. All you'll see is a tagline that says transferred from the IRS. Behind that tagline is real data that the schools and the state and the federal government are able to see. And we use that, again, to determine eligibility for financial aid. But you don't need to do anything with that, so don't touch it, okay? Now, if you're not eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool, you still have to answer any financial questions that are presented to you, as I said earlier. And you would manually have to put those figures in. And please remember, no cents, all whole dollars, okay? No negative numbers. If it's a negative number, it's an automatic zero, okay? And those figures will be visible to both you and the student, unfortunately, in that scenario. Because there is some situations where some families won't be able to use the data retrieval tool. But if you can use it, I strongly encourage you to do it. And when you go out to the IRS, and this is where you're going to need your FSA ID number again, this is one of the benefits, other benefits of that FSA ID. You're not going to see all your tax return, and you're not going to see any figures. It's just going to say, these are all the things that are required on the FAFSA, and it will automatically pull that into your application. So again, makes it really easy, students and parents. Okay. All right, moving forward. So we're almost done with the application. You can see we've gone through all those sections, and now we're at the sign and submit. So students, if you started your FAFSA using your FSA ID, when you get to this, and I have a little screenshot here, it's going to say student signature. You click on that, and it pulls in your FSA ID and automatically electronically signs your application, and it confirms that you have successfully electronically signed your application. So you're done. So then it asks for the parent or parents to sign it. So if there's only one parent information, they can use their FSA ID to sign it. Or if there are two parents information added, it's going to be asked which parent wants to sign it. Either one can. If only one has an FSA ID, that's the one that should sign it. Now, parents, If you can't create an FSA ID, and there are some situations where a parent would not be able to do that, you still have to sign the student's application. But you're going to be given the option to print out a signature page, which you can print out right there, physically sign it, date it, and mail it to the Department of Education. The student still can submit their application without your signature electronically, but the federal government won't process it until they get that signature page. They actually wait 14 days to see if you send it in. And if you don't, then they're going to reach out to the student. Parents, everything goes to the students. That's why they got to be looking at their email address. And they're going to say to the student, we got your application, but we can't process it because we don't have the appropriate signatures. And they're either going to ask the student or parent to go back into the online application and submit an electronic signature, or they're going to tell you to print out a signature page, or they will send you a signature page. But they won't process your application until they get that. So if you can do it electronically, that's the way to do it. Otherwise, it delays the process. Okay, moving forward. So this is the beauty, students. This is the hooray. When you submit and sign your FAFSA, you get a confirmation immediately congratulating you and telling you that you successfully submitted your application. Now, on that confirmation page, students, there's going to be a lot of really good information, so look at it, okay? It'll tell you what your EFC is. It'll tell you if you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant or the Federal Student Loan Program or Work Study Program. If you're not eligible for a federal Pell Grant, don't panic. You're just not eligible for a federal Pell Grant. Doesn't mean you're not eligible for other federal aid or state aid or aid from the schools. So don't worry about that, okay? This is where you're going to see the link, though, to complete that state grant form. Because remember what I said earlier? All first-time applicants have to fill out the state grant form. You're going to click on the link. It knows you're a Pennsylvania resident. We're one of 5 states to participate in this online process. It'll take you right out to the FIA website. You'll answer those 6 or 7 additional questions. Gosh, it should take you no more than 5-10 minutes to do that. Submit it, and you're done. So you've actually completed the FAFSA application and your state grant application. Now, students, if for some reason you don't see the link, you missed it, you forgot about it, and you try to go back in and find that, and you don't find it, don't worry about it. We get a copy, FIA gets a copy of your FAFSA. We will reach out to you, and we will provide a link where you can complete that on our website, the FIA website, on our student portal, or we'll physically, if we have to, we'll send you a paper state grant form that you can complete and submit. So it's not a big deal, but you just want to make sure that you complete that process and send it in. So if you can do it electronically, quickest and easiest way to do it. All right, now I want to talk about some special circumstances, take about 2 minutes because this is important. So parents, students, FAFSA is very black and white. You have to give it the information that it's requesting. You can't attach anything. You can't tell your story. You can't send in anything with the form, okay? It's black and white, okay? Now, if you have changes in your family or special circumstances, and they may have already happened, they may be happening now. They could be happening at the time that child or that student is actually entering college in 2023-24. You definitely want to reach out to the schools or school that the student is attending and let them know what's going on in your family. You also want to reach out to FIA, okay? You got to let us know too. And then we're going to work with you, and the school will work with you in determining how those changes, those special circumstances or whatever, may impact that student's eligibility for financial aid, okay? But it's the only way that we know about it is if you tell us. Please don't be afraid to tell us. We'll work with you and we'll help you with that. But you got to let the schools know and you got to let FIA know. It's the only way that we'd find out about that, okay? Because remember, we're looking at income information that's 2 years old. So in 2020, I had a great job, but then I retired. My income's a whole lot less, Or maybe I lost my job, because of COVID, or maybe my company, closed. Or maybe I couldn't work full time anymore and I'm working part time, or maybe I got a new job because I lost my job, but I'm not earning as much. These all impact your family's financial circumstances and your eligibility for financial aid. So please let us know. So as you can see on the screen, I have a couple that are listed. These are ones that I see all the time. Somebody gets divorced or separated. There's a death in the family. Somebody becomes disabled, reduced income for a lot of different reasons. Maybe you're on unemployment, you're collecting funds, you're not collecting funds, you've exhausted all those, could be a reduced amount. Maybe you lost your medical dental benefits, or you're paying, even though you might have benefits, you're still paying out of pocket. You know, maybe you had a one-time income coming in 2020, but it was only one time. It's not in 2021 or 22. You know, again, we can look at all that stuff. So keep that in mind. Okay. So you got to tell us. Okay. So what happens next? You actually filled out the FAFSA. You entered all the information. You submit the FAFSA. You got that confirmation page and says the federal government is processing it. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're going to process it. When they process it, students, they will reach out to you, probably via email, and they're going to let you know that your application has been accepted and processed. They're going to create that EFC. They're going to send all the information to all the schools that you listed on your application and any others that you may have added later, and send it out to the state. They're going to send you a summary of everything you put in the FAFSA. So that's not gone forever. You have access to that anytime you want. You can print it out and it'll list a summary of everything that you put in that FAFSA application. And then the schools and the state are going to look at your information. We're going to put you through our formula, our processes. We're going to send you a financial aid notification or offer, and we're going to tell you that here is your potential eligibility for different types of financial aid if you actually attend that school. So that's really what happens on the back end. And you will receive that financial aid offer or notification from every school that you've applied to and been accepted to. Now, remember, you can start your FAFSA without being applied or accepted to the school. But in most instances, the school won't send you an offer until you've actually applied to the school and been accepted to the school, because it doesn't make any sense if you don't apply or you're not accepted. Okay, so I want to talk very briefly about how do we determine your needs, students, because this is what the financial aid office is looking at the schools that you're going to. And students, I hope you apply to more than one school or look at more than one school, because a lot happens from the time that you apply to school, fill out your financial aid forms, and when you actually select a school and start. So you want to get some comparisons, you know, so that you can make a good financial decision for yourself, find an affordable school that works for you and has everything that you want in your higher education experience, okay? So the two components that we look at, because your need's going to be different at every school. The first thing we look at is the cost of that school. It's what I call the sticker price, okay? And that's going to be different depending on the type of school you go, because you know a community college is a whole lot less than maybe a state school or a private school, okay? And the other thing we looked at is that EFC, estimated family contribution, which is, that's a figure, be different for all my families, but it stays the same. Doesn't matter what type of school you're going to. But we use that figure to determine what does the students need at the school that they're planning on attending. Okay, so cost of attendance is the sticker price. Every school takes all of these components to build their cost of attendance each year. So actual tuition and fees that you will be paying for, room and board if you're living on campus, but even if you're not, if you're commuting from home, it still costs your parents for you to live there. So there's a living expense, books, supplies, transportation, other miscellaneous expenses like laundry, medical expenses, that all gets included. So this is what we call the sticker price. And students, if you've been looking and searching at your schools, you know some of those private schools have really pretty high sticker prices, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. And you may have said, I'm not even going to bother, you know. Well, don't let the cost or the sticker price of the school scare you. If that school has everything you want, and that's really a school you would like to attend, you know, I would say give that school the opportunity, see what type of financial aid they'd offer you, because you may find that what you actually pay to that school, what the net price at that school is a whole lot less than what their sticker price is. Now, how do we determine that? Each school has a net price calculator on their website. Okay, they're not equal. Okay, they're all different. So you, the student parent, are going to provide information on the school's net price calculator. They are then going to tell you, if you come to this school, here's what your grants and scholarships will look like. You'll take those grants and scholarships, subtract that from that sticker price, and what is left is the net price. So that $70,000 sticker price now may turn out to be about $35,000. And that may be an affordable school for you, or a school that you might be able to attend. Or maybe you need to look at another option, or maybe you need to have a conversation with the school because there are changes or special circumstances or other situations that are happening in your family that you want them to consider. Okay. So again, all net price calculators aren't created. Some schools will just give you an average of grants and scholarships that students receive who attend that school. So again, it's going to depend on the information that they're giving to you. Okay. So please use that, look at those, know what the schools are going to cost you. The next thing that we look at is the information you're provided on the FAFSA. So this is what the federal government is looking at and developing or creating that EFC, which never changes. So parents, they're looking at your income and your assets, mostly income. However, there is income protection allowance, parents. They don't take all your income, only a small portion of that, okay? And your assets, there's asset protection allowance. So again, they're not looking at all your assets. And if you have to provide any assets, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It'll tell you if you do. It only takes into account less than 6% of the net value of those additional assets that you're providing into account in developing that EFC. Now, this is where I would say to you, look at that question mark, get that guidance, because there are certain assets, parents, that never get included. So for example, your home that you live in, okay, that never gets included as an asset. So don't include it, whether you own it outright or owe a mortgage on it, never gets looked at. No personal property, no value of any insurance policies you have, no value of any, retirement funds or pensions or IRAs or annuities that you may have. The value of it don't get included. That's where I see some parents make a mistake and they inflate their assets. If you own a business and it's a family business and you retain at least 50% or more control of that and have less than 100 or less full-time employees or the equivalent, you don't have to put any assets of the business in there either, okay? Now for students, there's income protection. So students, believe it or not, you can work. Even if you didn't file taxes and you worked and made an income, you have to put that on the FAFSA, but up to $7,040 is protected. So as long as you didn't make more than that, none of your income's being considered. Now anything over and above that $7,040, they take 50% of that and they just add it right to that EFC. Assets, though, students, you do have to report those. So any asset that you own that's in your name, it's your asset, it belongs to you, they're going to take 20% of the net value of that asset and they're going to put that into the EFC. Now, the only asset that could be in a student's name that is not considered a student asset is a 529 college savings plan. So parents, students, if you have one of those, it's in the student's name. It's always considered an asset of the parent. And again, parents, as I said, your assets are protected. And again, anything over and above what's not protected is only assessed at less than 6%. They are looking at the family size. They are looking at the number in college still currently. And they look at the age of the older parent, because the older you are, they know the closer you are to retirement and a little bit more of your assets are protected in that scenario. So this is what the federal government's looking at in determining that EFC. So here's the formula, folks. Cost of attendance at the school. So remember, that could change. Community college is less than a state school. State school is less than a private school. Private school is probably the most expensive. So depending on the type of school you go, that cost could change. The EFC never changes, as I said. We just subtract that from the cost, and what is left is your need at that school. So this could fluctuate. So in this scenario, the financial aid office is looking to award this student up to, hopefully, $27,000 of need-based grants and scholarships and other need-based aid that they may have. Some schools meet 100% of the students' needs, some schools don't. So that's where, if school's not meeting 100%, you might have to find some other resources to help you pay that balance, okay? And then this is where students, you're going to get that financial aid notification letter or offer that's going to tell you all the aid that the school is willing to offer you if you attend their school. So that is your official notification. It's going to have the rights, conditions, responsibilities, you know, what you need to do, requirements to receive that aid, you know, how you can accept or reject it. It'll list all the aid the schools offer you, grants, scholarships, work study, loans, whatever the case may be. And then, you know, it'll give you instructions on how to accept or reject. Now, students, it's really important that you understand the type of aid that you're getting, okay? Because there's no standard format and there's no standard terminology that schools are required to use. So it's all over the place and sometimes gets very confusing. So when you're looking at your award notices, if you don't understand something, whatever, make sure you're reaching out to the school, okay, and asking them, what is that? You know, is that free money? Is it a grant or a scholarship? You know, or is it merit-based aid? You know, or is it, do I have to earn it? Or is it a loan that I have to pay back? Okay, so you know exactly what you're accepting or rejecting. Okay, so that's the whole application process. So where aid comes from, what forms you need to fill out, what are the deadline dates, what information do you need to fill out these forms, and what happens once you actually fill out the forms, submit them, and how does that information get processed? So we went through all that, and that's a lot of information. So I'm going to go very quickly and just give you some ideas of some of the federal and state programs that are there to give you ideas, some numbers, okay? But again, if you have any questions, any concerns, you need more information, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email or call me, and I'll be more than happy to assist you in any way that I can. So thank you for sticking with me and thank you for your patience. So moving forward, so for the federal government, as I said, right now, you could get up to $6,495 maximum for the academic year. That's the max you can get. Now, it's going to be based on your EFC. So your EFC currently would have to range anywhere between 0 and 5846. Okay, those EFCs could go from 0 to 999999. Okay, the lower your EFC, the more federal aid you're going to get. So if your EFC is over 5846, you're just not eligible for a federal Pell Grant. That's all. So don't be concerned with that. If you have a 0 EFC, you're going to be eligible for that maximum amount, regardless of the school you go to. Now, there are two other federal programs that some schools participate in. One is another grant, Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Congress says the school can't give you any more than $4,000. So that's the max that you're going to see on those financial aid offers or letters, okay? But it could be different. You know, so you may have one school that's giving you $1,500, another school maybe $2,000, maybe another school $4,000. It's all going to depend on the funds that are available at that school. And these programs are sometimes limited. Most of the time, this money goes to Pell eligible students first, okay? And then there's federal work study, which we talked about, and there's no limit. You can only, you can get as much as the school has in their funds that are available, but you can't get any more aid than what the cost of attendance is at that school. So keep that in mind. Okay, so these are the major federal programs that are out there that you'll be considered for. Now, for the state, okay, so we also have a state grant that you'll be considered for. And right now, our max amount is $5,000. So if you're going to school full-time, that's 12 credits, in any type of school in Pennsylvania. So it could be a community college, it could be a business trade or technical school, state school, a private school. They all participate in state grant, okay? If you're going full-time, you could get $5,000 max. If you're going part-time, so that's 6 credits, you can get half of that. So it's $2,500. Now, if you are eligible for a state grant, but you elect to go to a school out of state, we only have agreements with 6 states. So District of Columbia, Washington, Delaware, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, and West Virginia. You're only allowed to take a maximum $600 out of state. Unless you're a veteran, then it's 8. Any other state, New Jersey, New York, Florida, California, Montana, unfortunately, you can't take any of your state money with you. So keep that in mind. These are other programs that are offered through the state. They are available on the FIA website. All of these programs will require you to fill out the FAFSA and a separate application. So just go out to the FIA.org website. Go under the tab that says Other Educational Funding, and you will see all these programs listed with the criteria that you need to meet because it's very specific. And if you're eligible for any of these or you meet the criteria, then go ahead and apply for those as well, because that could be additional grant and scholarship money for you. But we don't have enough time to go through all these programs. And again, the criteria is very specific. Okay, so moving forward, I want to briefly talk about some loan programs that's available to both students and parents through the federal government. So students, there's a loan out there that's automatic. If you need more money, you can participate in this program. It's the cheapest and easiest loan that you're ever going to get because there's no collateral, no credit check. Normally, when you apply for a loan, the banks are doing a debt to income ratio. They're determining whether or not you're a worthy or a applicant. In this case, federal government's automatically going to lend you this money, but you are limited to the amount that you can borrow each year. Now, this is in your name, students, so you have to repay it back, usually after you graduate. You get a 6-month grace period before you go into repayment. You have lots of options, a lot of repayment options. You can pick and select and choose any one that makes sense to you. The interest rate is determined by Congress each year. There are some fees that are deducted off the top. So you can see it's 3.73%, low interest rate, and then there are a little over 1% fees come off of that. Your loan can be subsidized or unsubsidized. What do we mean by that? So if you're eligible for a subsidized loan, student, it means the federal government is actually going to pay the interest that's accruing on that loan while you're in school at least half time and during that 6-month grace period. Okay. Now, if it's unsubsidized, it means not only do you have to pay back what you borrowed, but the interest that was accruing on that loan, you're going to have to pay that back as well. Okay. So again, it's a loan that's out there. It's available for you. The schools will work with you and tell you how to apply for this if it's something you're interested in. And remember, students, that you don't have to borrow the maximum amount. So if you only need an extra $1,000 or whatever, then only borrow that. Only borrow what you need, because you do have to repay this back, unlike a grant or a scholarship. Now, as I said, you are limited to the amount that you can borrow each year. So for my first year students, dependent student, the max you can borrow, regardless of the type of school or the cost, is $5,500. Okay, that's it. But each year after that, you can borrow a little bit more if you want. And if you're independent, you can borrow a little bit more as well. Okay, so the schools will help you with this and work with this on this type of loan if you're interested. Now, for my parents, there's a loan out there for the federal government that offers you as well if you want to help your student. However, it's not automatic. You go through a lenient credit check that is determined by Congress, and if you pass that, then you can borrow up to the cost of attendance minus any other financial aid the student has received. So you're not tied to the same loan limits as the students. So parents, when you get the bills from the school and they subtract all the financial aid that they're offering the student, and if there's a balance still owed to that school, you can actually borrow the full amount of that balance from this program if you want. Okay. Now, the interest rate is determined by Congress. Again, each year it's higher for you, 6.28% currently. And there are some fees that come off the top, and they're pretty hefty. So 4.228 comes off of that. So parents, caution to you. If you actually want to borrow the full balance that's due to the school, you got to borrow a little bit more because the federal government's going to deduct these fees off of the top of what you're borrowing. So you'll be a little short if you're not taking that into account. Again, this is a loan in your name, and you are responsible for paying it back. You can't send it to the student. You have lots of repayment options when you go into repayment. You don't have to pay anything while the student in school if you don't want to, but you can if you like. And if you're not eligible because you didn't pass the credit check, you can do 3 things. Nothing at all, and it allows that dependent undergraduate student to borrow a little bit more under the student loan program, so they can borrow in the first year an additional $4,000 unsubsidized, so that $5,500 becomes $9,500. Okay. Or you can appeal it because sometimes the information the government may be looking at or using is not correct. Or you could apply with an eligible cosigner. Okay, so they're your options, parents. And that's the federal loans that are offered to the student and to the parent. There's one other loan out there that I want to briefly talk about that is available to both students and parents, and it's called an alternative loan. These are not federally regulated, okay? So the terms, the conditions, the interest rate, the amounts that you can borrow, any limits to that, any benefits attached to it are all determined by who you're borrowing from. So you got to do your homework, students and parents. Make sure you're reading the fine print and you know what you're getting into. And this is a good financial decision for you because they're all different. They are not federally regulated, okay? So I would tell you that you could go out to your bank and see what they have to offer you. You can talk to the schools that the student is interested and see what type of alternative loans that other students have applied to or have been approved for. The state of Pennsylvania offers an alternative loan, and you definitely should look at that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you can get these loans from a bank, a credit union, some state agencies like FIA, as I mentioned, or from other financial institutions, okay? Now, the nice thing about most of these loans, students and parents, is most of them don't charge any fees. So parents, you have those pretty hefty fees on the PLUS loan. Usually alternative loans have no fees attached to them, which is good, but it's not automatic. So you have to look at that. The other thing too is when you go into repayment, when the borrower goes into repayment, if there's a cosigner on there and that borrower pays so many payments on time, so it could be 36 months, 48 months, 12 months, whatever is in the agreement that you sign, then they're going to release the cosigner. And then the full responsibility of that loan becomes the borrower. So parents, if you're co-signing on behalf of the student, you can get off the hook once that student makes that last, payment on time. Okay, so this is a loan that's offered from FIA. It's the cheapest loan that you will probably get, alternative loan, in the state of Pennsylvania, because this was designed for Pennsylvania residents who needed additional assistance. You can see our interest rates are very competitive and very low, a little more than 3%, and we cap them at 6.69%. Now, we will do a debt to income ratio just like any other bank or financial institution. This can be in the student's name, the parent's name. Parents, you can be a cosigner on behalf of the student. They're probably going to need that. They won't get it without that. But as I said, this is probably the cheapest alternative loan you will get in Pennsylvania. So I would say if you're looking at an alternative loan, make sure you're looking at this one, but also look at what your bank may have to offer, what the school is offering, and do your comparisons, do your homework. Make sure it's a good financial decision for you. You can go out to the FIA website, and there's more information about this loan. It's called PA Forward, and we'll help you with that. All right. Very quickly, scholarships. I really want to promote this. Students, make sure you're reaching out to your schools and looking to see what type of scholarships they offer. Is it merit-based, maybe based on academics, or maybe it's based on you being a good athlete, or maybe you're proficient in art, music, band, going into a particular major or some other characteristic that you're bringing to the school, and they're going to give you a scholarship, which is free money. So look at that. Look to see what you have to apply or be qualified for those. Make sure you're touching base with your school guidance counselor so you'll know what local and regional scholarships are available to. And then there's an array of national scholarships out there that you can apply to. Now, students, again, don't pay for free money. Anybody that solicits you, or anybody that you go out there and apply for says, yeah, you're eligible for the scholarship, but you have to pay a fee or give us your credit card. Stay away from those. They're all scams. There's no right or wrong way to research these scholarships, so you can do it any way you want. You can do it through, I'm a male, female, I'm 6 foot tall, your major, whatever the case may be, and see what you get. You can see on here, I have a list of free scholarship databases that you can use, and there are many more, okay? So fastweb.com is the largest national scholarship database that's out there, but there are others, and again, just put in your information and do this now and do it each year while you're in school because your profile changes and there are new ones coming on board all the time. It is work, but if you put a little effort into it, you may be surprised because you may get additional free grant and scholarship money, other than what the federal government, the state, and the schools are already offering you. So again, you might not have to take out a loan, or it may, keep that debt down. Okay, so please do that. So again, go out there, visit your schools, whether in person or online. Use those net price calculators so you know what it really costs you to go to that school. You know, use that estimator offered by the federal government if you want to find out, like, immediately what your EFC might be, what age you might be eligible from the federal government without actually filing the application. Make sure your, schools are affordable. Maybe you need to look at some other options. Have plan A, B, and C, explore those scholarships. Absolutely. And then please create those FSAIDs if you haven't already as soon as possible, and put that information away or when you get ready to apply for financial aid. So again, a lot of good free information on the FIA website. A lot of publications, both in English and Spanish, to help you navigate the financial aid process. The federal government has some really good resources. They have infographics, they have videos, all kinds of things to help you through this process. So again, go out there and look at those resources that are available to you. And here's my contact information again. So please feel free to reach out to me if I can help you in any way. So I'm going to end my formal remarks here. Again, if you have any questions of a personal nature, you can always reach me at any time, whatever that is, and I'll get back to you. And we'll look to see if anybody has any questions now, or please submit your questions, and we'll try to address those if we can in the next couple of minutes that we have left. Nicole, I don't know if there are any questions that you see, or if there's any additional information that you may want to share with our participants this evening. So I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thank you. I just have some brief comments before any questions. I did see somebody raise their hand. So just as a reminder, we are scheduled to have FAFSA completion night on Tuesday, October the 26th. And so that night you'll be able to come in and get help actually completing your FAFSA. So of course, if you want to go ahead and do it on your own, you totally can do that. I will actually send you guys some directions and some other things tomorrow if you want to do it on your own. Sometimes you're like me and you want to sit next to somebody and have them just kind of breathe next to you, right? Well, not these days with our mask on, but so it will be at the school, okay? And so it's going to be on Tuesday, October the 26th in the cafeteria. And so I will send you guys information with a checklist of what you would need to bring with you. We have someone from Montco who will be bringing some people with them to help us. It's something that we do every single year. So again, tomorrow morning, hopefully I can send you an email of the recording from the English session, the Spanish section, some instructions, and then we normally give you guys a ton of handouts today. So I'm going to give you digital copies. However, Mr. Berg did send us a box. And so we do have physical handouts for those of you like me who are old school and we want to have things in our hand. All right, so those are my quick announcements, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Burke. So let me look in the chat here and see what the questions are. Okay, so one of the questions is, how can you add the extra colleges above the 10 that the FAFSA online application allows? Great question.
Yes. So what I would tell you in that situation, because FAFSA limits you to a maximum of 10 at any one time. So look at your top 10 schools. So when you file your initial FAFSA, list those top 10 schools, submit that. When the federal government processes your application, they're actually going to send you an email and let you know that's done. You could then go back into your FAFSA. Okay, so you're going to go to the same place. You're going to log in. It's actually going to welcome you and it's going to say, hey, you've submitted and we've processed your application. What would you like to do now? You're going to see an option that either says, add a change or add a school. Just click on that. You can go right to the school selection, and you're going to have to take off, depending on how many new schools you want to add, you're going to have to take 1 or 2 schools off, add your new schools, and then just submit that. So remember, when you submit your FAFSA, all those first 10 schools all got your information. When you go back in and take one or two of those schools off and add a new school or new schools and submit that, not only are all the schools that are left on there going to get your information again, but those two new schools are going to get your information. And you can keep doing this at any time. So that's how to do it. But also remember, when you get into the FAFSA, that little question mark, it'll give you guidance on how to do that. And you can actually print it out if you want. So you can have that available. So it just, you know, you can look at that. So it walks you through the steps, but it's very easy to do. Okay.
Okay, guys, what other questions do you have since we have the expert here? I know a lot, but we have the expert, so make sure you ask the questions when the expert is here.
So I see a question that says, please send information on what we need to bring to FAFSA.
Yeah, I'll send that.
So Nicole's going to send that out, but briefly, I would tell you that students and parents, if you can, bring a copy of your 2020 income tax return if you filed, any W-2s and any schedules that you have with that. Hopefully you won't need it. You'll be able to use that IRS data retrieval tool and we can pull all the information in. But if just in case, if that doesn't work or whatever, we can manually enter the information. Students, make sure you know your social security number and you, you know, enter that. And then also, if you can, you want to create your FSA IDs prior to doing that FAFSA. That was another question that came up. So you can actually do that tonight. And like I said, it only takes the Social Security Administration 1 to 3 days to authenticate you and get that done. So your FAFSA completion night is not for 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks. So if you do that tonight or whatever, that'll be done. So if you can do that, that'll be really helpful because then you'll get to use the benefits of everything that's online. Okay.
And if I can add, when he says, if you can do that, do it. Okay. Because I can't tell you how many families come that night and there's some kind of issue with them creating their FSA ID and they never get to do their FAFSA at all. Okay. So do that ahead of time. And even if you want to try to make an appointment with me to do it, but you can do it on your own. It's only going to take you 5 or 10 minutes to do that FSA ID. So it's one for the student and then one for the parent or guardian, or the parent rather.
Right. Parent,
So you
right.
saying
Yeah.
guardian.
Guardian doesn't
parent.
need to do it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And there's a little video out there that the federal government put together. It's like 2 minutes long that walks you through the whole steps. So
They have it.
I see another.
Sometimes people don't like to watch the videos. They want Ms. Mitchell to explain it to them again. And so, guys, when we send you those 3-minute videos, please watch them because now what I'm doing, when you come to see me, I'm making you watch the video, okay? That's what they're for. And they're cute too, right?
Yeah. So there's another question about, does a parent have to create a save key? No, parents, please don't confuse that with the FSA ID. Okay, the save key is just at least 4 digits or characters, no more than 8. It can be anything you want. So parents, if you're starting the application on behalf of the student, you can create that. Make sure you're sharing it with the student because they need that to get back into that application. Students, if you're creating it, make sure you're sharing it with your parents so that when they go to add their information in, you know, they're going to need that save key. So no, it's only one save key. Either the parent or the student can create it. And make it as simple and as easy as you possibly can, because you're only going to need that to get back into that saved application. Okay. What makes a student independent? Really good question. So there's 13 questions that are presented on the FAFSA that determines the student's dependency or independent status. So basically, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I'll tell you, if you're 24 years of age, if you're a veteran, if you're active duty military, if you're married, if you have a child or another person that is dependent on you and you're paying more than 50% of their support and will continue to do so from July 1, 2022 to June 30th of 2023, then you would be considered independent. if you are deemed homeless, if you are in foster care, if you are an emancipated minor, if you are determined that you are in a legal guardianship that was determined by a court of law in the student's legal state of residency, again, that student would be considered independent. So it's based on the way students answer those 13 questions. And, most of my seniors answer no to all of those questions, and therefore they are dependent and need to provide parent information. But roughly off the top of my head, they're the questions that are asked of the student to determine dependent status. The only other one that's out there also is if you're in a graduate program. So that's meaning you've already have a bachelor's degree program and you're going into a master's or a medical program or a PhD or something like that, then you would also be considered independent. So hopefully that answered that question.
So I just dropped a link in the chat for you guys that is from the FAFSA website that just said everything that he just said with all the criteria on it. Okay, let's see. So that was that question. The FAFSA system was having glitches last week when we created our account, so we got on the call with them, but their system would not recognize my personal email. So I ended up using my work email and that was accepted. My daughter used the email she created just for the college application purposes. Any thoughts? And that could be an isolated incident because there are some glitches every year. Especially when it first opens.
Yeah, and it sounds to me that they reached out to the department. I don't know why they wouldn't accept their email. The only thing I can think of, if somebody else was using that email, because remember, when you're creating your FSA IDs, if that's what it's in relation to, that information needs to be unique to the individual who's creating it. So students cannot have the same email address as a parent. Parent can't have the same email address as a student. You cannot have the same mobile phone number. It won't allow it. If somebody else is using that email previously, and maybe they shouldn't be, or an FSA ID was created using that email, it will not allow you to use another. What I would say to you is really, if that's a case, because you can always go in and add an update, what I would do is just contact the Federal Student Aid. And I'm trying to think of, I don't know that number off the top of my head. I want to say 1-800. Yeah, I think it's 1-800-433-3243, but don't quote me on that. Just call them and let them, because it's a federal system and they'll be able to access that information and they may be able to look at and see why it's not accepting that or whatever and provide guidance for you. So it is a federal system and I don't have access to that, but sometimes there are some unique situations that it gets a little quirky. So sorry about that. Okay.
Says, does the student W-2 info get entered in the same location as the parents? Since you need to report your retirement plan 401k contributions, do you need to include any employer matching contributions?
Okay, excellent question. So first part of that question, no. When you get into the FAFSA, you're going to see that there's a parent financial section, and that's all parent financial information. And then it'll go to student financial section, and it's all the same questions as well. So it's two separate sections. If a student, when you get into the investment and asset and pension, like contribution to a 401k or retirement or pension, be really careful with that. That information comes from your W-2. It's box 12A through D, but there's only certain letters that you would include in that. So sometimes if you're in a pension plan that's not voluntary, you may see that there's amount that's being contributed, but it's listed as a DD. That doesn't get included. So I don't remember what all the letters are, but they'll be listed there for you. I want to say it's D, E, G, H, and S. That's the only things that would get entered. So again, when you get to that section, okay, it'll tell you specifically where to look on your W-2 and what letters to include. Anything else in those sections, do not include it, okay? Now, if a student has a pension or retirement fund or whatever, and they're contributing, it would be on their W-2. I would say that's probably not the case for most students.
The next question, I'm just going to send you a link for this because it's going to be too long to answer this question. But it says, what kinds of questions does the FAFSA application ask the student? We each have an account now and will begin the questions, but I'm confused as to how to proceed for both of us. So I will drop in the link and also email you guys. Mr. Burke, do they still have those hard copies with the questions on it that you can just see ahead of time?
Yeah, you can go out and get a PDF of the actual paper FAFSA application with everything on it. And I'm going to tell you, it's not that bad. When you go through the different sections, students, the first thing you're going to go through is student demographic. So it's your name, your social security number, your date of birth, your email address, your phone number. And a lot of that gets pulled in from your FSA ID if you had it, your address, okay? Then it asks you to confirm your high school. You know, where did you go to high school? It's going to ask you things like what year you're going to be in college, when are you going to graduate from high school, what type of degree are you looking for, you know, a bachelor's degree or whatever. It's really not that difficult, and there's help throughout the application. And it kind of asks the parents the same thing. You know, when it gets in parent demographics, it's just their name, social security number, email address, phone number, and then the parent financials, you know, which is mostly income and stuff coming off of the tax return. Same thing with the student financials. And after that, it's just a sign and submit, you know. So it'll ask the student to, you know, when you get into the college selection, list all the schools who you are thinking about going to, you know, and you can enter those schools in there. Or if you know their the school code, you can enter the school's code and it'll find it for you. You just enter it, and then it'll ask you what's your housing status. So you're going to live on campus? Are you going to commute? Are you going to live off campus? They're the questions that it really asks you.
So I just put in the chat what's called the FAFSA worksheet, and it has all the questions that they will be asking on the form. So this will be great for you to look over before you get there, just to make sure that you have what you need. But please do not fill this out and mail it in because it's going to take 10,000 years to get processed. Just go ahead and do it on the computer.
Yeah. So there's another question about if you submitted your FAFSA and you made a mistake. So when can you go back in and correct that? So here's how it works. When you submit your initial FAFSA, as I said, it only takes no more than 72 hours for the federal government to process that. And they will send an email to the student and confirm that they've processed that. Once you've processed the application, the federal government has done that, you can go back in at any time and make any corrections or update. And you're gonna find that that happens really quick. It could be the same day or within a day because they already have an application. It's already been processed. All they're doing is updating information, a change, maybe you're adding a school, whatever the case may be, and that's what they're looking at. So that happens very quickly. But you can't do it until the initial FAFSA is processed. Now, if you're filling out the FAFSA and you didn't submit it yet, and you realize you didn't add a school or you made a mistake on something, you can go back right into that, go into any one of those sections and go back in and edit that or update it, you know. But once you submit it, you have to wait until it's processed, and it could be as early as 24 hours the next day before you'll be able to go in and make any updates or changes. So hopefully that's clear.
Okay, let's see what else we have here. Somebody's asking for a video, so don't worry about it, guys. I'm gonna send you the videos from tonight and those little bitty 2-3 minute videos that tell you how to do it. Actually, it's since all the old emails that I sent you guys to remind you about the event, they're in there too. If you submit the form and realize that there is an error, when can you get back into the form to correct it, update, you may have just answered this, update the data since it is processed so quickly, and how quickly?
Yeah, we talked about that one.
All right. I was looking for something.
Yeah. So once it's processed, they can go back and update, and it's pretty quick.
Where's the best place to find the college code to put on the FAFSA? I believe that once you get to the college section, you can actually type the information in and it'll find the code for you. But Mr. Burke will give some clarity on
Yeah,
this.
there's a link. You can and you can also go out to studentaid.gov. There's actually a link on the federal website that lists all the college codes. You could go out, if you know what schools that you're interested in, you could actually go out to those schools' websites. They're all listed on there as well. You know, and worst comes to worst, you could just Google list of college codes, and it'll take you out to the federal link immediately. You can just go through it and find your schools. So a lot of ways in which you can get that information, you know. But like I said, you don't have to have that. You can just enter the name of the school that you're thinking about. And if, you know, there are schools that have similar names or whatever, it's going to give you all those listings and you just select right from that. It's very easy, you know, within the application process. So you don't need the code. If you have it, you can enter that, but you don't need it.
And then can you answer a question? This is always asked a lot. And I'm sure you talked about this in the presentation, but if a student is undocumented, what their role is with I know they're not allowed to complete the FAFSA, but there are some schools that, like Cabrini, may have a form that you fill out. Sometimes schools like Montco, they find some money for you, not to pay the whole thing, but they find some monies. Do you have any other advice for students that are undocumented?
Yes. So definitely you want to reach out to the schools you're interested, because each school handles that differently. There are some schools actually that would tell an undocumented student to print out the FAFSA application, the paper, and fill it out. Or they can even, you know, you can do a PDF and enter all the information in and print it out and bring it into the school. And they actually use that information to then determine the student's eligibility for any institutional aid. Unfortunately, undocumented students are not eligible for any federal aid or state aid, at least not in Pennsylvania. But they are eligible for institutional aid. There are private outside scholarships that are available to them. If they want, they can Google scholarships for undocumented students. You know, I can try and send you a link also, Nicole. There are some out there that they can look at to help them with private outside scholarships. Yeah. So I would say the best thing is to do is reach out to the schools that are interested and just ask them what forms or what information do they need to complete to be considered for aid at that school, because each school handles it differently.
And I do have some resources for students that are undocumented or DACA, but I'm going to send that to you at another time because people are always complaining about how long my emails are. So for the email for this, I'll just try to keep it to what we talked about tonight, and then I'll send something separate for students that need that information.
Super.
So this might be our last question. Okay, that seems like that's the last question. So does anyone have any other questions?
Well,
going once, going twice?
I just saw one more. Yeah. So is it better to enter a code or a school name? Any problems with them processing the application with either one? After you log back in and make any changes, will all of the schools get the update even if you removed and added schools? Really good question. So the first answer to that is it doesn't matter whether you enter the school code. If you know it, that's great. But instead of having to go out there and look all those up or whatever, you can just enter the school name. Either one works really well. So it's totally up to you. In terms of when you log back in to make any changes or updates, so let's say you had 10 schools on there initially, and you remember I said you can only have a maximum of 10, but you want to add that 11th school, you got to take one of the schools that you had on there off to add that 11th, because you can only have a maximum of 10 at any one time. So what happens is when you filed your initial FAFSA, all those 10 schools got your information. when you take one school off and add the new school, all the other 9 schools that were on there will get the information again, and the new school will get the information, but the school that you took off will not get any updates. They only get what initially was sent to them. And, you know, if you're only adding a school, then there are no other changes and you don't have to worry about it. But I would say if that's a school that eventually you wind up looking at or seriously looking at or want to attend, I'd probably put them back on the list again, you know, but they'll get your information initially. So I hope that makes sense.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and joining us for Financial Aid Night. We had about 35 to 40 people on here between the 2 presentations. So thank you so much for coming. I hope that you got a lot of information. Of course, you had the expert, Mr. Michael F. Burke, who was able to communicate to you guys exactly what you need to do. So again, the information that I'm going to send you from FIA is going to give an overview of everything that he discussed, and it has some pretty pictures in it and all that kind of stuff to kind of break everything down. All right. So just look for those emails, but if you guys can give a little virtual hand thingy, clappy, whatever you do to give Mr. Burke some thanks. I see some things in the chat there. And we just wish you guys a good night.
Thank you. Thank you again. Best of luck, everybody. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop the recording.